Today we're doing something slightly different. I've been looking at copyright-free image collection of the State Library of Victoria and found these amazing photos from Antarctica. This first image is pretty typical of the kind of images I've been finding. Things like this car parked out in the middle of the ice. Crazy. So normally I'd start despotting before I paint, but because this image is so broadly white and featureless, I thought I'd try and knock some of the grain and some of the noise out first. And while it sort of did a pretty good job of reducing some noise, it was a bit much. So turning the opacity down, I'm going to collapse or merge those layers together and use that as the starting point. I always like to get rid of the borders on an image. I think an image looks far more contemporary if it doesn't have a border or a frame around it. I've sped all this footage up because the process of despotting can get a little boring to watch. For the majority of this cleanup, I'm using the remove tool, which is one of the newer brushes in Photoshop, and it's really great at removing detail. It's kind of like generative fill underneath your brush. What I'm doing here is just looking at the levels of the image, just seeing if there's any detail there in the really pale whites, any detail in the snow or in the sky that I might want to keep. But I actually think some of the flatness and the paleness of the environment is what's really compelling with the dark figures. Sometimes it's hard on a cleanup like this to know what's cloud detail and what's basically noise or water damage or anything else that could have happened to either the negative or the print in its life. I tend to favour a flat sky. I tend to try and take a lot of these little dots and spots out because I don't think tiny little dots like that exist. It's also hard in the Antarctic to know what's snow, what's ice, what's anything like that. So generally I think flatter is better. And that's this image done. This next image is Ernest Shackleton. He was an Antarctic explorer, and I found this image in the archive. It's pretty damaged. Lots of wear and tear on this one. I'm not sure what's going on with the bottom right hand side, but we'll fix that. So starting with the remove tool, just going to get rid of most of the damage and then assess the levels after that. He got to 97 miles of the South Pole before running out of supplies and turning back in 1909. Then in 1915 he tried again, returning to Antarctica with a group, and he tried to complete the first crossing of the continent. A lot of people don't realise how big Antarctica is. It's twice the size of Australia, or as big as the USA and Mexico combined. Sometimes I add a level adjust layer here just to brighten up the image, and it helps you see the dots and spots a little better. And being careful not to paint on top of that. Painting underneath that layer, you can easily clean up the image like this. You can see how much more damage you could see on the image working this way. Okay, that's looking a lot better. Now I'm going to have a quick look at neural filters, see if the photo restoration filter adds anything. And after having a good look, I'm just deleting that layer. I'm not entirely sure it's beneficial to the image. So a simple levels adjust, just checking the blacks and whites, checking the midpoints of the image, making sure it feels good. And looking at his face, it feels a little flashed, so I'm going to put a levels here, and I'm just adjusting for exposure on his face. I'll make that mask black, select a white brush, low opacity, just paint in the center of the image just a little bit. Put a bit more contrast into his face. This image is of a ship. There are tons of these on the archive. So really I'm just having fun. I was wanting to see if I could expand the image left and right using generative fill. Not for any particular reason, just I thought compositionally it would be nice to see this in a landscape. So as you can see, I've straightened up the horizon, and I'm going to simply clone out the black frame around the edge so I get a nice clean border. So it's as simple as using the crop tool, pulling out a left and right of the image, an amount that you want, and then hitting generative fill, and it gives you 3 choices. Now I'm not super thrilled with either of, or any of those, so I've gone again. You can just keep hitting generate as often as you like. Okay, that's fine. So I'll pick the other side, stretch it out. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to collapse that down and then try to blend those edges in a little more. I'm finding it a little hard to get detail on this side, so I'm just going to clone brush a little bit from the right hand side of the image. Just gently here and there, just to break up the surface a bit. It's interesting to me that this ship had both sail and steam capabilities. So moving over to the neural filters now, I'm just going to have a look and see if the photo restoration helps. A little bit of scratch removal. I want to show you that some of the pitfalls of using this. Whilst it's tempting to use it, you can see when I toggle how parts of the image are getting lost, like fine rigging, things like that. So I always find if I use it, I add it to a separate layer and then paint back the areas of loss. You can see it can be quite aggressive when set quite high. Alright, that was a bit of fun, but for no particular reason. I think that looks lovely. This one's a great image. Now, this was listed as possibly a weather balloon, but the fact there's a passenger in a basket underneath makes me really curious as to whether that's the case. I wish I had more information on this picture. So a quick crop, remove the borders. I was curious whether there was any more information to be had from the people on the ground, so playing with the shadow slider on the shadow highlights dialog, I'm just seeing if there's any more info anywhere. So quick adjust there. You can see there's a tiny bit of information in the people, but not anything amazing. Curious to see a little dog standing there too. So using a mask, I'm just going to paint in a few little spots just to indicate a little bit more detail on those figures. And just a little area of lift there, just subtly to indicate a little bit of the detail on the side of the balloon. Now onto cleaning. So using a combination of brushes, starting with the spot healing brush, just work my way around the image. You can see here I hit a little bit of the rope there, and It's a common thing I do. I sort of knock a little bit of detail and it shifts or changes, and then I try and hit it again in the hope that it'll come good, but it doesn't always do that, and sometimes you have to just undo your work and go back to before you introduce the damage. There's a couple of different ways you can select things in Photoshop. You'll see here under select there's sky and also subject, and subject's great for something like this balloon in the middle of the image. And what I want to do is select that image, build a paint layer, and then select invert that selection so I'm only addressing the background, and I'm going to try and flatten out the sky just a touch. I think some of those wavers and wobbles and bright spots are not necessarily in the sky itself, but maybe a function of the age of the image. So I'm just going to try and flatten those out a little bit. And as well, some of that could be introduced by me despotting. There's no information online about who these people are and what boat they're on, what expedition they're on, but I thought it was a pretty cool image to try and play with shadows and highlights. You can see immediately just by lifting up the shadow amount and then dropping down the highlight amount, I get a pretty interesting kind of balance. At least flattening out the overbrights and the darks there. Something to start working with. So with that in mind, I crop the image with the crop tool. Desaturate it. And now I can start removing the scratches using the remove tool. Interestingly, it's removing the scratches and replacing it with another one. I'll jump past these buttons. I'll probably clone brush those out because a tool like remove tool is not going to do a great job of restoring buttons like that. So coming back to those buttons, I'll select the clone brush and then select one of the buttons I like and then cloning it onto the other one. Again, using my old trick of putting a levels layer above the image, I can see the black dots a lot more clearly. So this is working on a JPEG. You can see there's lots of pixelation where the contrast is really, really crushed around the edges of the frame. I'll try to address that later. All right, that's looking a lot better. So now I'm going to go to the neural filter, turn on the photo restoration, add a tiny bit of a JPEG artifact correction, because being a JPEG image, it's going to have introduced some of that blockiness. And then toggling it, you can see it does give you a smoother result. Now, I'm going to copy the original image and put it above and blur it quite a lot using a Gaussian blur. And the reason I'm doing this is because I like the color of this image, and by putting that on a layer and hitting the color option, I'm only introducing those blurry colors back into the picture. Just enough to add a little warmth to it. And there you go. Love this picture. People using a zip line to get goods and equipment up the ice. So I'll start off by straightening this image, cropping it. I'm being very careful to keep that figure on the right and as much of the bottom of the image and the top of the image as I can. So this is a perfect example of straightening an image but then using generative fill to correct the losses on the side, or just to invent the stuff on the side. So making a selection and hitting generative fill. You can see it does a pretty good job of generating just snow and the continuity of the ocean there. It's not hugely detailed, so it does a great job of that. Now the top's going to be interesting because clearly the mast of the ship is outside of the crop of the image. Now we could take a guess. I'm going to let Generative Fill have a look, see what they think. And it's given me some options with the mast going clearly off the top of the frame. So I need to address that. And thankfully I have another image of the same ship. So I'm going to select the top mast. So I'm going to take the full width of the mast just for reference and kind of just guess how big I think that top mast should be. Interestingly, in the original image, the top mast does extend longer, so my my assumption was clearly wrong. I'm just going to put that detail up there. Better to have detail from the real ship than none at all. And using a mask, I'm going to paint out the areas I don't want, just keeping that top little piece. And then grade it down with a levels layer that's been isolated to only operate on the image below it, and then kind of grade it down to match. Again, a quick look with shadows and highlights to see if there's any more information to be had in the image, any adjustments. I quite like the depth of the blacks on the figures in the middle of the frame, but I do like how the shadows just lift the ice around them very slightly. Now I'm playing a game called What's a Tool? What's a piece of equipment? What's a scratch? What's a dot? I have no real idea, so I'm going to leave a lot of the little black dots and spots that are scattered around the figures. And once more returning to the neural filters for the photo restoration. I generally have that second image of the photo restoration on a separate layer, and I work my way around the image, just toggling on and off, seeing how I feel about what it's doing, whether it's beneficial to keep or not. In this case, I'm just electing to keep it mostly on the ice, but masking it a little bit around where the figures are. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. This image is called Interior of Base Camp, 2 men beside stove, washing hanging above. This image's got a lot of detail in it, but you can sort of see on the left hand side there's a fair bit of light leak or wash or lack of contrast. So I'm going to try and correct that. So I'll build quite an aggressive layers layer above that, and layers adjustment layer, and using a paintbrush, paint in some of that area in the mask. And now that allows me to start to correct just that area there, bring a little bit more contrast in, and you can kind of see it trying to balance it up with what I see on the right hand side of the frame. Now I zoomed in on this image and I saw all the dots and spots, and I was getting a little tired, so I thought I'd try the neural filters first. Collapsing this down, merging those layers, going to neural filters. I thought I'd try the scratches, but you can see what it's doing to the paint pot and the edges of the boxes. All sorts of details are being considered as scratches by the AI. So I'll leave it on, but I'll create a mask of that adjustment layer, and then paint back to the original underneath, just in those areas where I think we've lost too much detail. And you can see me toggling the layer on and off, just working away around the image, seeing if any parts of the image that should remain are gone. And with that process done and some of the grain neutralized, I can go in with the remove tool and just start working my way around the last of the damage in the image. This last image I really like. The description is 2 men with sled, penguins in foreground. Very helpful little description there. The first thing I'll do is put a hue saturation layer in here and then go to the master control. You can see that the yellow is quite a lot darker than the rest of the image. So I'll go to the master control and only select the yellows. And now I can play with the luminance area just of that yellowed area of the picture. And you can see I can get rid of a lot of the problem areas pretty quickly just with that small adjustment. So by selecting different color bands and then adjusting their luminance, I can level this image out quite a bit right from the get-go. So very happy with that. And by now you know the usual tricks. Crop it, paint out the corners, get despotting. And there you go, that's the last one for today done. I hope you enjoyed that little look through some of these old photos. I love these, and I'll probably do another series. It's nice to see them all look so different and not belonging together, and then at the end they all feel very, very harmonious and clean. Anyway, thanks for joining me. See you next time.